Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking at some new decks that are like changes or like modifications, new cards from the recent aetherdrift set for standard best of 3. So we're going to be looking at recent MTGO tournament results and seeing what kind of decks have been popping out outside of your usual, like we see over here, your Gruul Aggros, your Xur Overlords, your Pixie, your Oculus, your Bounce decks, your Mono Red, your Cage. So we'll take a look at a handful of decks today. All the deck lists will be pasted in the video description so you can copy paste to your heart's content. So looking at the last 15 days, we see kind of in popularity wise, a couple of those highlighted in the intro. But Domain Overlords, Red Deck wins, Azorius Control, which kind of popped up from the recent Pro Tour, as well as Omni Combo are the highest win rate decks in the MTGO tournament scene. While Gruul Aggro is the most played, it's got about a 50% win rate. Notably, some of that is being artificially dropped down because in the mirror, playing it, you're always going to have 50%. Xur Domain, it's got a positive matchup there. So seemingly one of the better matchups that it does have is against that particular deck. Basically that Mono Red, the Omni combos seems to have a fairly reasonable matchup into it as well. So let's jump into it. So this one is from Linden43. They went 5-0 on MTGO. And we have a return of Phyrexian Fight Club. So Phyrexian Obliterator. This was a list from the PT. I believe some folks had played it. But Phyrexian Obliterator with the combination of Bushwhack, basically force your opponent to fight the creature, and then they sack a whole bunch of things. Now, notably, very good into Mono Red, Gruul, stuff like that, since they want to attack, and Obliterator just says no to attacking. This deck, I think, would probably have a pretty bad matchup into like Domain, heavy sweeper decks, as do most of these Golgari decks from a value perspective. So it's a Golgari kind of stompy deck, Sentinel for value, Preacher of the Schism, just a lot of creatures that don't get hit by Nowhere to Run. The counterpoint to that is you are playing a 4-drop that doesn't do anything when it comes into play and can be easily bounced with This Town Ain't Big Enough. Some Harvester of Miseries as sweepers, Dread Knights, Baloth Main, Caustic Bronco for value. Then just a whole bunch of removal, blotouts, cut downs, go for the throats, Terra Sunders, Analyze the Pollen, Bushwhack, help you hit your land drops, and then a whole bunch of removal and discard style effects. Sideboard, you got Blot Out, just flexible removal, hits the biggest thing. Caustic Bronco for more of the grindier matchups, lets you play a little bit lower on the curve. So against like Domain, your Obliterator is probably not going to be as good. So it gives you that kind of effect to just kind of lower your curve, be more aggressive, providing card advantage. Miasma is a sweeper for go wide decks, more hand hate, Ghost Vacuum for graveyard hate. Nissa is very good into the Domain matchups. Anything that's playing a lot of enchantments or artifacts. Baloth for the discard decks, Terra Sunder, again, just flexible removal, hits artifacts, enchantments. Frillback, again, another card, artifacts, enchantments, graveyard hate, life gain, just kind of jack of all trades. And then Vivian for the grindier matchups. We then have Orzhov Sacrifice. So this one was from Danny M. Rebel. They went 5-0. So with this list here, it's a Raise the Past deck. So you're looking to get creatures into your graveyard and then bring them back and then have things kind of trigger life, loss, life, gain. So you have a draw engine and Enduring Innocence. So while not being able to be targeted by Raise the Past, this helps you kind of grind and lets all your creatures kind of cycle each other. Zahur, Glory's Past, Blood Artist effect. So it's a sacrifice engine. Sorry, this one's not the Blood Artist one. There is another creature in the set that is a Blood Artist, but this one here, once you get max speed, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you create a tapped 2/2. So this gives you just more bodies. It's also a sack outlet. This one's only once per turn, whereas if you look at Bartholomew, it's as many times as you want. So this lets you kind of keep sacking your creatures when they die. Ilias Accord, Blood Artist effect, gain and drain. You have Vengeful Blood Witch, again, gain and drain. Snarling Gorehound puts cards into your graveyard. You have a bunch of creatures that net you multiple creatures. Infestation Sage, Nesting Bot, and then Gas Guzzler can be used as another sacrifice effect potentially. So we basically bring back a whole bunch of creatures, sack them, drain your opponent out that way there. Duress for hand hate, Guest Lost, cheap removal, Shelter by Ghost for the mono red matchup. Cathar Commando is a creature that can blow up artifacts and enchantments that you then can get back. And then Soul Guide Lantern for Graveyard Hate, obviously. Orzhov Pixie. So this is a update to Ben Stark's list from the Pro Tour. They Cabezzola Dobolo went top 16 in the standard challenge, 5-2. So the core of this deck, it's got elements of like the Pixie deck, but not like fully built around just bouncing effects over and over. So with this one here, you have Grim Baubles, you have Hopeless Nightmares, your Momentum Breakers, Tiny Bones joins up, but interesting, you have Temporary Lockdown. So you can put a whole bunch of your things underneath the lockdown to get those values over and over again. So Hopeless Nightmare could come back into play. You can get the Momentum Breaker, which can force your opponent to discard potentially as well. You can pick it up with Nurturing Pixie or blow up your own Temporary Lockdown with the Lauren. You have Zorlin that can buy back your Temporary Lockdowns, any of your enchantments, your Baubles. And then Shelly kind of grinds them out. Lillian here, and as well as Unholy Annex as card advantage and a win condition in itself. So just kind of grind them out value-wise, tear apart their hand, and then just accrue value over multiple turns. Graveyard Hate and Rest in Peace, spend its talent for the grindier matchups, just force discard their hand. Lily for the grindier matchups, Pest Control for low to the ground aggressive decks. Lauren, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Enduring Innocence. When you kind of shift out and become more of a mid-rangey deck to grind them out, this draws you cards off your creatures coming into play. Cut downs for the aggressive decks, Bezas against aggressive decks, Stonewalls gains you some life. So we've seen Boros burn in some iterations, but most notably we have access now. And are they even playing it, which is interesting. So they're playing the Raucous Carnival over the new Verge. So I thought for sure they'd be playing the Verge, but an interesting land to see. This one is from Tio Kadu, first place. So it's got a bit of the mouse package in it with Screaming Nemesis, Flowerfoot Swordmaster. We have Bulwark, Ox. So 2 mana, 2/2. Whenever it attacks while saddled, you put a counter on it. And then when it sacrifices creatures you control gain hexproof and indestructible to end the turn. It's an interesting inclusion. With the Azorius control playing more Wrath of Gods, this indestructible effect becomes more relevant, but obviously against Sunfall, not as not as impactful, if you would. You got Burst Lightnings, you got the Aura package in here, and then Monstrous Rage. Sideboard, you have Count on Luck. So triple red, beginning of your upkeep, you exile top card of your library, play for the turn. So kind of a play on Experimental Frenzy style effects. This does take a full turn cycle to actually take effect though, which is a little slow. There's also a lot of incidental enchantment hate going around. Nemesis for the red matchups, Barrage blue or white matchups, Torch for loaded like smaller creature decks, Graveyard Hate, Requisition Raid could blow up enchantments, artifacts, flexibility there, as well as Destroy Evil for bigger things or like the enchantment. So like the domain decks basically. So we have 2 artifact decks. We have Izzet Repurpose. This one's from the Manland, second place in the challenge at 6-3. So you have artifacts in Memory Guardian that gets cost reduced with affinity, as well as Thran Spider gives you a Power Stone and then can find you artifacts. There is kind of built around 2 cards. So you have Repurposing Bay. You can sacrifice an artifact, and then basically it's Birthing Pod. You go get an artifact that's 1 more cost. As well as Simulacrum Synthesizer. So this is generally going to be one of your first picks up. Sets up a scry, and then every time a artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield, you get a Karn Struck, so it just progressively makes a bigger army as you're just kind of playing through. So what you're trying to do is obviously there's that game plan, but then there's also just with things like Enigma Jewel for any activated abilities, make a bunch of artifacts, you can go up the chain, you can then go basically with the Bay to get the Radiant Lotus. You can sacrifice any number of them, and then you have Boommobile where you can exhaust its ability, and just the whole bunch of mana that you get from the Radiant Lotus, you can fireball your opponent to death. Otherwise, you have like Chainsaws, you have Legion Extruders, artifacts that count as artifacts that can be used to pod away that also are removal spells. You have Collector's Vault with the Enigma Jewel that also plays pretty cool to basically be free mana, and then you get to generate a treasure token, which can be fodder for the Radiant Lotus. Pyroclasm is sweeper for the aggressive decks. Braided Net kind of taps down one big thing each turn. Barrage, blue and white stuff. Grindier matchups, you have Tomes. Negates in here. You have a Call Pakal. I like saying that word. Beginning of each player's end step. If an artifact enters the battlefield under your control this turn, look at the top 2 cards. So it's basically a card advantage that gets around draw, so things like Shieldred won't hurt you that way. And then Spectral Interference as a cheap counter spell. You have Dimir Repurpose. So similar idea. We have a Dimir version of the deck. So you have your Synthesizer, you have your Repurposing Bay. Within this deck here, you have Surginger the Mealender, just a creature whenever another artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, so it keeps getting bigger. It has protection from, or it gets trample and hexproof and haste as long as an opponent controls a planeswalker, so pretty reasonable to Kaido. Gearhulk here, reasonable body, 4/4 lifelink, helps against the aggressive decks. Also can kind of serve its purpose as hand hate or filtering out your hand. You have Leveler as a tutor target, Thran Spider as a tutor target. With black, you get access to Grimbauble, cheap removal for the aggressive decks, Tithing Blade as an edict effect, dissection tools against the aggressive decks, full Collector's Vault in this one with the Enigma Jewel. Leyline Axe in here is a free artifact, can give double strike. Then you have Demonic Junker, which can be a removal spell for fairly cheap that can also be tutored up. What's kind of cool is this will often not cost 7 mana, given that it has affinity, but then it tutors for the Cityscape Leveler, which is kind of sweet lines there. Spyglass for activated abilities, Mightstone, Meekstone for card advantage or removal, and then the Mephitic Draught is just a loot style effect. Graveyard Hate, more gingers for like Planeswalker decks. You have Malicious Eclipse as a sweeper, another activated ability Hate, Filigree Silex as an edict, Soulless Jailer, things coming into play from graveyards or from exile, so kind of gets them that way there. Nexus of Becoming as a grind card, Braided Net again, tapping down stuff, Dissection Tools as for the aggressive decks, gives you lifelink bodies, Stone Brain for combo hate, or just kind of taking key cards, Omniscience, you can take some of the cards out of the domain decks, stuff of that nature. And then you have Tithing Blade as an edict, and then Duress as hand hate. And then lastly, Golgari Graveyard. So from Gonito, first place, 5-0. So this is a up the beanstalk deck, but it's looking to get a bunch of cards into the graveyard and then get a cost reduction on things like your Husk Burster Swarm, costs 1 less. So basically what you're trying to do, get things to cost like 1 mana. Your Hollow Marauder can cost 1 mana. You have this Grave Stalker can cost 1 mana. And then Sinnoh Scout helps enable it. Rebel Halt Maverick helps enable it. Balemerc helps enable it. Soul of the Lost gets much bigger from it. And then you just kind of churn through your deck that way there. So very soft to graveyard hate, obviously. Makes casting some of these bigger things a little harder. But you do have things like Scrap Shooter to help against some of that graveyard hate. This plays pretty well into the discard decks because you want cards in your graveyard. Kind of get some value. You have Terror Tide in here as a sweeper. Starving Revenant. I think this plays. So Descend would be as long as card goes into the graveyard. So as long as it's not a replacement effect like Rest in Peace, you can get this trigger, kind of another way to attack your opponent. Gain and drain if you descended 8 cards in your graveyard, 8 permanents. Obstinance Baloth. The one of Leyline of the Void always makes me laugh. Like, how likely are you going to hit a one of Leyline? Either play 4 or play something like Ghost Vacuum, something of that nature. This kind of inclusion always makes me laugh. Haywire Might, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Misery for cheap removal, or Sweepers for go wide, hand hate, and then cut down in there. That's it for the week. Let me know what deck kind of pops your interest. If you have any cool decks, things you've liked from the PT, we'll catch you next week. Thanks.